Hi, I'm Alex Howard, and welcome to Conscious 2. My guest in the studio today is Krishna. Hi, Krishna.
Hi.
And Krishna is a senior teacher of Waking Down and developing a teaching called the Tapestry of Being. And in today's interview, we're going to be exploring a bit about Krishna's own journey. We'll be looking a bit at Waking Down, but also this more recent development that pulls together Waking Down with some other traditions and ideas as well around the Tapestry of Being. So Krishna, firstly, welcome to Conscious 2. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, and we've got various friends of mine I know have been really touched by your work, so I'm keen to have a little dialogue and explore some of it.
Great.
But maybe as a starting point, I know you've studied many different traditions and had a journey of a number of years, but how did this whole thing open up for you in terms of your own curiosity and your own kind of quest for truth and awakening?
Well, probably started when I was about 14, 15, and became interested in more conventional evangelical Christianity for quite a while, till I was about 18, 19. And at that point, I became interested in more Eastern traditions and began working with a man named Ken Lloyd Russell, who was basically his background was in Zen and in Tibetan Buddhism, and he was trained by Fritz Perls in Gestalt therapy. So it was both psychological and spiritual, and I began meditating with him. I had also had an interest in a more general way in all kinds of New Age spirituality in my teens and early 20s. But when I began working with him, I became more focused on traditional forms. And became involved after that in the Nyingmapa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism and Dzogchen. And I didn't plan on it, but I ended up becoming involved with a Hindu teacher. I wasn't very much interested in gurus. Even when I was involved with Tibetan Buddhism, I was keen to simply do the practices and not be with a particular teacher.
Yes.
But I basically fell in love with H.W.L. Punja, also known as Papaji.
Yes, yes.
Disciple of Ramana Maharshi. He was a very incredible being who I can't even say the degree to which he's affected me.
And he's influenced a great number of the key teachers that I would say that are around at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a really deep reach in terms of people that have been touched by him.
Yes. I mean, with Punjaji, with Papaji, it was, you could say a combination, and maybe that's not the right word given the whole thing, but pure non-duality, and yet he had a background of devotion, so that was running through his teaching and his presence all the time.
Yes.
And so after working with Papaji and after he passed on, there was a period where I felt, I mean, at the time I wasn't conscious of what it was, but now I think it had something to do with the fact that, regardless of the fact that it was a non-dual teaching and that there is no other, I had a real relationship with him. It wasn't, I wasn't a fan of Punjaji, like a rock star, which sometimes guru relationships can be that way.
Yeah.
It was much more intimate and personal, and I needed that. I mean, I'd write him, and he'd write me back. When I went to his house, he was there with me, and something seemed missing after his passing, and I think it had something to do with that now. But at the time, it just was okay. The non-being of being was true enough as the basis of everything. But how do you live life from there? for me, that was a question. And it wasn't that it was clearly enunciated. It was more like an urge.
Yes. One of the things you were saying to me before we started filming was around this idea of paradox. And I really liked what you were saying around if we try and reconcile or kind of pull together all the different teachings that are out there, it kind of becomes an impossible task because there are different perspectives. And what you were just saying there, I really like that around, from a non-dual perspective, there is no you, there is no me, there is no person, and yet you had a personal connection with Papaji.
Yes.
You say a bit more about this idea of living with paradox. I think it's tough for people because people want to have that clarity.
Yeah. So, you could say absolutely that in which everything is arising in is our nature, is what we are, is who we are. And even to say who there doesn't make sense. There aren't any, there's no multiplicity there. But what's arising in that is a unique body, unique point of view, you could say. Now, in some sense, you could say there is no point of view from the absolute, but from within that, there is point of view. There is a unique body, unique mind. And of course, body, mind are processes themselves, continuously arising. They don't exist in themselves either. But moment to moment, that also arises. And the sense that you can take a stance in which you are not that, that's beautiful. For a long period of time, that's what it was about for me. But then it became apparent that this is a form of duality in itself.
Right.
Right? So there's,
there's
that and everything else.
Yeah.
And whether you call everything else an illusion or not,
there's still a polarity.
Exactly.
In a sense. Yeah.
Exactly. So relaxing the idea of maintaining the position of the self or the no self it was something that happened over and over again and was experienced as, I'm losing it, wait a minute, let me be vigilant and go back and all of that. And this is actually where I became attracted to the teachings on Waking Down and Samuel Bonder, because there was the notion of paradox, and it was already my experience. So I found that community, this Waking Down community, very conducive to me allowing myself to be natural and not to vilify the processes that were naturally happening in my own case.
Right, because I think that's one of the things that often happens. It's like people have tastes of a non-dual kind of place, and then they have other experiences in their life that contradict that. And as you say, it's like, these experiences are right, these ones are wrong, but now I'm in a polarity and I'm just confused and I feel like I'm doing it wrong, and it's a whole... So it's really helpful the way that you're putting it. And maybe just for people that are watching that haven't heard of Waking Down, if you can just say something around just kind of what that teaching is and just a little bit of context with that.
So the full original name was Waking Down in Mutuality. So those three components, waking, down, mutuality, are understood to be codependent or interdependent in a very real way. And yet can, like three parts of a bar stool, let's say, right? So the waking dimensions would be the dimension of, particularly of consciousness, what doesn't change, but also as well as awakened energy. So certain traditions talk about Shaktipat, or the awakening of Kundalini, or the awakening of the field of feeling, which is actually perceptible. So depending on the tradition, that's considered important or not. Certain Hindu tantric traditions consider it incredibly important to have all of the energy field awakened, or a feeling of non-separateness being part of your awakened experience. And yet you have traditions like Zen, where anything having to do with an experience that's changeable or perceptible, and also Advaita to some degree, that's considered part of phenomenality, therefore not important. But in Waking Down, both of those are acknowledged as part of the waking dimension. And then the embodiment is the embodiment of that energy, but also the full acknowledgement of all of our human dimensions, all the sense of limitation, that arises in identification with thought, identification with the body and emotions and all of that. And that also happens.
Yeah, and including that
Exactly.
feels really important because,
Yes.
again, otherwise it gets rejected, but it's part of our experience.
Yes. And lo and behold, the thing that's quite amazing is when that is, again, not vilified, but the term that's often used there is green lighting. When that's green lighted, when that's kind of given the thumbs up, and even, the movie term green lighting, it's not just the traffic light, but the movie term where someone green lights a script. So you're not sure of actually, or a production.
Yes.
You're not sure of the ultimate outcome, but you trust the players enough and you trust the people involved enough that you're willing to back it, and it's going to proceed into something that maybe you're not exactly sure what it is, more or less you think you do, but you trust that process. There's something about trusting that when you've realized the space of consciousness and the energy field and the human, that if you let things play themselves out without, again, vilifying or stopping anything along the way, but allowing it all to proceed and unfold, that it ends up integrating. And that's actually what happens.
Which, ironically, of course, therefore you have more of a sense of inclusion,
Exactly.
i.e., less of a sense of duality.
Absolutely.
Let's say.
It becomes even more, it becomes a non-duality that includes what people would usually call duality, right? And this is actually...
Which is, I guess, a true non-duality, right?
I would say so, yes. This is actually more in alignment with the Kashmir Shaivite Hindu tantric traditions. That's their view, actually. It's very, very similar. I found this out after the fact, later on, when I researched other traditions. I mean, I ended up becoming very much involved with Waking Down. That was, I first initially was involved in 1998 and ended up becoming a senior teacher and primary player in the educational division in particular. I helped found the schools that train teachers.
Yes.
The Institute of Awakened Mutuality. I was a founding member of the Waking Down Teachers Association as well. And so...
well, just
yes,
because you were saying that these three legs on the bar stool.
Yes.
So this mutuality piece, I'm also, and I know again we were talking off camera around. That's one of the places where the holding of the paradoxes becomes
Absolutely.
really important. So
Absolutely.
I'd be curious to hear a bit more about where mutuality comes into it.
Good. So mutuality, there's a number of facets to it, but it has to do with awakened relationship. So again, you could say the further development or the further logical piece is that if you're allowing yourself to identify with everything that arises, you're also now in the world of relationships where there actually are others. And it's very paradoxical because you haven't lost touch of the fact that there aren't any others simultaneously.
Right.
And so there are two basic meanings that I found in the dictionary, at least in the dictionary that I happen to look up for paradox. One seems to be older than the other, but the first one is that it's a puzzle that doesn't make sense, so it has to be solved. So a paradox can't actually exist, right? So it's like a mystery that you have to solve.
Right.
That's, I think, the older one. But it might not be the oldest one. But anyway, the second one is that it doesn't make sense logically, but it's still true.
Right.
That there's some way that it's... And the second is actually the way it was held in Waking Down, particularly in regards to others. So... the idea is when you're speaking, the way that I describe it, wasn't originally the way it was described to me, but when I was trying to describe it to my friends who were in Advaita Vedanta, I said it's like this. If we have 4 or 5 people and John is speaking, when I'm listening to John, what I'm basically listening for is, what is it like for consciousness to become John? And John's going to be the expert on that. I'm not listening for whether I agree or disagree, whether he's speaking truth or not truth, or anything like that. I'm just interested in what is it like for him to be him. And then when Jane speaks, it's the same. What's it like for consciousness to be Jane, to be a Jane Smith in particular? Only Jane Smith is an expert on what it's like for consciousness to be Jane Smith. So in each case, there's a listening which is simply listening as a form of understanding and curiosity and a desire to hear someone in their own right. And there's a validity simply in their existence. The fact that they are experiencing this is enough for me. It doesn't mean that I agree with them, or it's not about agreeing or disagreeing. There's something that, there's a kind of transformation that happens without giving over my own point of view, because of course, there's arising my own body, mind's ideas, reactions, right?
That's what I was going to ask you about, because that's the challenge. It's like, on one hand, I'm going, yeah, it makes total sense. It's like everyone's view is valid, but I can own in my own life. It's like if I'm emotionally invested in a relationship, and the other person sees it differently to how I see it, I'm emotionally invested in I'm right, they're wrong, and I have to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. And which doesn't work out so well in a relationship.
Doesn't seem
that's the human pattern well, certainly my pattern. I think it's probably the human pattern.
Most definitely. And part of embodiment is part of the embodiment, this is not a kind of egalitarian leveling either. This is a strange thing. It's like, it is very paradoxical in this sense as well, that honestly speaking, my truth is more important to me than other people's truth. That's just the way it is. It's not, we could think, oh, it shouldn't be that way, whatever, okay. And now, of course, there's some degree to which I'm trying to be objective as well. But to know that a person's truth is there and it's theirs, and I have mine and it's here, then when I'm like, if I, in relationship like with my partner, I'm more apt to say, well, when you say such and such, I feel this. This is what arises in me. I feel upset when you say this. Oh, I feel afraid. What ends up happening, and it's not a set of shoulds and it's not a set of rules. Actually, it ends up becoming more and more organic as the paradigm is relaxed into. We end up leading with more vulnerability after a while. Not right away, but after a while, it's more like, this, when you say this, this makes me scared because I feel like I understand this very differently. And then you speak your truth. But it's not like you're wrong.
Right.
It's more like, this is what happens here. When you speak that, this affects me this way.
Yes.
So it's not a matter of overlooking injustice. If you go to the other extreme, someone says something racist or horrible over there. It's more like, I'm listening, and I can feel this thing, and then and I'm listening and rather than arguing with them, which actually doesn't usually help anything, but rather to honestly be there and then say, when you say that, it makes me really afraid, because when I was young, blah, 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 or I've seen other people abused, or whatever, but I'm speaking from my own truth. And it gives, it's not a cure-all, it's not a perfect thing. It can be quite messy, but it actually is far more effective over the long term.
And what I'm hearing you say is that it's possible to be in depth of contact with somebody and hold a different perspective, like this idea of duality and non-duality, or the absolute and the relative, different ways of kind of putting it, but a place where we can hold the paradox of multiple perspectives and that be okay.
That's really it. And so this is the difference. Waking down in mutuality, some people mistake it for communication exercises and psychology, but see, the whole thing is held in an awakening. It's the awakening to that formless consciousness and the feeling of connectedness and the recognition of the many arising in the one, so that it's effective on another level. It's effective, the awakening itself becomes mutual. So it actually, you find that people who may be attracted because they like the conversational aspect of it, begin to awaken to the non-dual in the midst of, they didn't realize they were in that field. They thought they were doing communication. And then people who are doing more psychological work where they're like, it's never psychotherapy, but the more psychological dimension is shared and people are expressing it, suddenly they feel the transmission or the energetic grace, field of grace, and they're expanding, and it's like, what's this about?
Yes.
And then people who come in who are meditators and who are just interested in the non-dual space and have been busy ignoring their stories, other people's stories, suddenly they're drawn into it, and they begin to feel the current of connectedness in the midst of that, and they go, oh, there's value to actually allowing, I don't have to be trapped by it,
Yes.
and at the same time I don't have to push it away.
Yeah, so and just thinking about your analogy of the kind of bar stool with the three legs, and one of the things that I like about that is it's almost like if you take away one of those legs, it becomes unstable.
Yes.
And it seems like a way of having a more integrated, grounded
Yes.
practice in a sense. And I'm mindful, we've got kind of 5 minutes or so, but I'd be curious to hear a bit more about some of the practices, like some of the ways that facilitate within the waking down, or indeed more broadly, the practices that you see of helping people.
So a lot of it is simply holding this kind of view. So it's not so much about techniques.
Okay.
In particular. I mean, I just described in a way holding that paradigm, and actually, I mean, some people, the most common way is to do a talking stick, like each person gets 5 minutes and you're simply listening, and that's in the mutuality groups.
And there are meditation practices in the waking element?
In the waking element, it's, mostly it's self-inquiry for the waking dimension, just as Ramana Maharshi and most people in Advaita would be, and Zen would be familiar with.
Yeah.
But there's this notion of not rejecting in the in-between, like between practices, not rejecting what arises as being somehow a problem, or put it this way, even the sense of problem is not a problem. Acknowledging that, acknowledging the messiness and things like that. And in terms of waking down itself, there's teachers, there's students, there's things to connect with and all that in terms of the community.
Yeah.
But I think the basic thing of green lighting your experience and not being averse to the notion of duality arising in non-duality is a big piece. Yeah,
and I really like what you just said about these weren't quite your words, but what happens between the practices. Like, that kind of mess of daily life, like that to me, I always feel it's where the real potential is, and yet it's the place that gets ignored the most in spiritual
and there tends to be at those tend to be the places where people have the biggest stories around failure and not quite doing it right and not quite belonging and all that, and a lot of radical acceptance and having a sense of validating yourself even as you're going through the tough places, or being validated by others. I mean, that's part of mutuality. Is very important. It's as if the field itself becomes the teacher. So some of where I brought this in the larger context is because I came in with so many other traditions. I began to, and this is what the Tapestry of Being is about, I began to do this with other traditions, so that Buddhism, there's many forms of Buddhism where the highest teachings are sometimes in conflict and sometimes they're the same, but certainly, whether you say Dzogchen and Zen are having slightly different views, but then there's Kashmir Shaivism that has a very different view, and then the devotional schools, some of the Sufi, Ibn Arabi's teachings, things like this, where it's theistic and non-dual. If you try to put together and make a super map, it doesn't work too well. I mean, I mean, who could figure all that out? It's not actually, from my perspective, that's not desirable. So what ended up happening for me is I ended up treating each of the traditions the same way I would treat each person. They have their truth, they're speaking their truth, and I listen to each of them as they are, and they affect me. So I think I was talking about this before.
Yeah.
There's, in Kashmir Shaivism, the ultimate truth is that phenomenality is actually Shiva's or God's manifestation. Everything that arises is his manifestation, or God's manifestation, or the goddess's, hers. And so it's inherently real, even if it's limited. It's a limited perspective, but it's the divine's perspective. So everything that arises is real. And then you have the Buddhist non-dual teachings, in which everything is ultimately illusion, because it's interdependent and not made of anything in particular, and it dissolves, and it's transient, and it's momentary. So this verb to be, it is an illusion, it isn't an illusion. What I've done is use the phrase, there's a way in which. So when I'm listening to Buddhism, they can tell me the way in which the world is an illusion. And I can learn all the ways in which the world is an illusion and practically apply that to my life in service to freedom. And then when I'm listening to Kashmir Shaivism and they say the world is real, I can listen to all the ways that the world is real and that what arises is real and practically apply that to my life in such a way that works. And this is true with all the devotional schools and everything. It doesn't have to agree. It's all human experience. It's all our heritage. It's all the birthright of human beings and of the planet. And in this way, what's beneficial can be absorbed. I'm finding that in the 21st century, there are fewer and fewer people who have allegiance to one paradigm.
It's very hard when you have the internet.
It is, isn't it? Exactly, the internet blew it.
Different kind of worldviews, right?
Yeah, so even in the case of waking down, that's not my only paradigm. I'm holding this in a larger space, and I feel that more and more of us are. Mm-hmm. And even when I speak this Tapestry of Being, it's not actually a map, it's just an orientation. It's a way of orienting. Everybody's tapestry is uniquely woven. What's going to be the parts and pieces that you weave your tapestry or that your tapestry is woven in is unique to you because it's having to do with your life, what's important for you, what's needed for you, what's interesting to you. Everybody is different.
And of course, it's very liberating because I think a lot of people these days, I think you go back 30, 40, 50 years and people would align themselves with a teaching or a tradition. And I think with the kind of growth of individualism and people kind of being encouraged to follow their own truth, I think increasingly people find it hard to commit to one thing alone, but I feel a resonance here, but I also feel a resonance over here. And I really like the way you talk about that, and you're, in a sense, inviting people to listen to their own guidance around
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really about that. It's about learning to trust your own guidance. It's around being able to hear it more clearly. I mean, that's really it. It's about being in that sense, you could say, everything is arising in consciousness, but as long as there's a sense of you and being led, to learn to listen to that leading. And those happen, see, this is the thing I found, is that even though the great Advaita Vedanta teachers, they were thinking paradox, everybody's in paradox anyway. Right. It's just, we hear the paradigm and we kind of cling to it.
Yeah, and of course...
But that's not actually their lives as well.
The great teachers create from integration.
Exactly.
It's a bizarre thing, people then follow a lineage and don't have the integration.
Very true. I mean, Ramana Maharshi, if you listen to his story after his awakening, he was led to go to his mountain to live his life. He was pulled to be Arunachala. He had this devotional relationship, apparent duality in a sense. You could say, well, when he had his awakening, why didn't he just stay where he was? Why did he have to? Yes. Why was he compelled to go there? So this is, in the lives of people who are, who have the language of total non-duality, there's all kinds of play, lila, things going on. So listening to your own guidance, developing your relationship with your own guidance is really what it's about.
Krishna, I wish we had more time.
It's
very beautiful what you're saying. If people want to find out more information on you and your work, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, the website is Krishna Satsang, KrishnAsatsang.com.
Great. Fantastic. Well spelled out as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Krishna. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Alex. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. And we look forward to talking with you again here on Conscious Tea very soon. Bye-bye.